While safety is of utmost importance, learning is also extremely important as well. So what lessons can be learned from the 2020 school disruptions due to the lockdown, and will we be having to apply them this year? It certainly seems like we might have to. I'm joined now by the executive head of Redhill School here in Johannesburg, Joseph Gerass. Thank you so much for your time. Do you support the department's decision that schools should only reopen on the 15th of February?
Sally, this is a difficult one. And firstly, I want to say that in an ideal world, all of our students would be back at school by the 25th of January, as planned originally by the Minister of Education. In an ideal world, the Department of Basic Education would have foreseen the spike, especially after events such as Rage, and would have ensured that schools were ready to accept students on the 25th. There is no doubt in South Africa, very little doubt in my mind, that our children, especially those in vulnerable areas, are much safer in schools where they can be monitored and where we can ensure that correct protocols are adhered to, where children are given food, education, and where we can look after their social and emotional well-being. What's really interesting is that during the third term of last year, and we learned this, you asked me that question, we had no cases in our particular school of coronavirus from either our students or our teachers. However, coming back from the holidays, I have multiple teachers with the virus, and we are starting to hear of our students who have had it, having caught it during the holidays. So, I think what the government got wrong here, and what the government seems to keep doing, is not to be planning ahead of time. It's almost like we've got to the end of the year, we'll worry about it when we get back on the 25th. And I think what history has shown us and what 2020 has shown us is that you cannot be living in a world of corona and taking each day as it comes. You have to have a lot of foresight and a lot of planning. However,
you know what they say, hindsight is 20/20 vision. Forgive the awful pun about 2020, but it's very hard to know what's going to happen. What are you going to do at Redhill? The department is encouraging private schools also to stay closed until the 15th. You've just said that there are quite a few cases at Redhill alone. So are you also going to stay closed till the 15th?
Right, so we're in discussions around this, and I think, there's a lot of debate. Once again, what we find ourselves is government never seem to be clear on what they would like us to do. So you would have heard there was huge confusion after this morning's briefing. Our reading of it was that it was clear that different schools will open at different times depending on when they were scheduled to come back to school. And our legal advice has been that we were scheduled to come back on the 11th, therefore we will, give a 2-week break. My understanding from government is that the 2-week break is to ensure that as parents and students return from the holidays, there is a natural period of isolation, so that students who might have the virus will get over the virus and come back to school without it. We have given our kids those 2 weeks, and I've got to say that the overwhelming majority of our parents, want us to open up school. We are going to stick to the guidelines of ensuring that we have the 2 weeks so that our children and our teachers can get over the virus if they did have it 2 weeks ago. And what we are stressing to parents, and I'm stressing this to all parents out there, whether they're going back in 2 weeks' time or on the 15th, it is going to be of little use if we continue as normal. If we allow our children to go to parties, to visit friends, we will have basically ignored this period that has been given to us to get over and to isolate. And I'm imploring parents to ensure that children stay at home, are isolated, and as parents to do the best that they can to make sure that they are not allowing their children to behave in risky behavior. And as we know from Rage, and we've had this discussion, teenagers especially will engage in risky behavior. And given the leeway, they will visit friends, they will go out. And I'm worried that even though the government have said we shouldn't be back at school, what is going to ensure that our children are not going to go to shopping centres? In the first lockdown, shopping centres were closed. Now they're still open, life goes on, and I promise you our teenagers will carry on with life. And that's why we think the sooner we get our kids back to school, where we can monitor and we as adults can ensure that they don't partake in risky behavior, the better for all of our students.
There's been some criticism by the unions of, it seems seems that the couching of it for private schools by the government is you're encouraged to please only go back in the middle of February. And I totally hear what you're saying about the risks of that, whereas government schools have absolutely no option. They are not given, principals are not given the power of making a decision. And you think of some of the very well-resourced schools, especially around Johannesburg, government schools, who absolutely can set up to make sure they open safely. Do you have a problem as well with this sort of different treatment of private and public schools by the department?
Look, Sally, I think there definitely is, there is a problem, but I've always been of the opinion that you cannot treat all schools the same. Each school has a different set of circumstances. Let's be honest, if private schools go to online learning, there is going to be a further disadvantage, because schools that are in vulnerable areas, we know from history, are not going to be able to partake in online learning. So private schools, whether you tell them to go back now or go back in 3 weeks' time, their learning is going to continue. It will be a disruption, it's going to be a disturbance, it's an inconvenience, but students at private schools will continue to be educated. What we've got to worry about here is what is happening to the most vulnerable in our community, who are being denied an education by saying you need to stay at home. We know they're not getting online learning, and at the same time, they're not getting the essentials. They're not getting education. They're not being protected. If we look at our vulnerable areas in South Africa, we know that those students are not being looked after because their parents can't look after them. Their parents are having to go to work. So what happens to the kids? We all know that during the Industrial Revolution, schools were set up to look after children while parents went to work. And we seem to be ignoring this fact.
Yeah, you make a very good point. What is your message? You know, this is not our first rodeo. We've gone through this in 2020. We've learned a lot of vital lessons. So what are the big lessons that you think pupils need to remember? I would imagine, particularly your matrics for 2021, must be starting to get anxious already on this news.
Look, I think, as you said, Sally, this is, not the first time we're going through this. So it is really not as difficult as it was the first time. But I think that our students, our children, are going to look at us as role models. And this is a time for us to be the best possible role models for our children. Complaining and talking about how hard it is will not teach our children how to best navigate change. Instead, I would say let's show them exactly how to adapt, adjust and thrive during these times of change, and how to step up and say, what can I do to help? This can be an incredible opportunity to learn important life lessons that they otherwise might not have learned. It's a time to empower our children and help them feel more in control of their world instead of at the mercy of it.
Yeah, that's a very good potential lesson, but I'm thinking of the frazzled parent who is terrified at the thought of trying to get back to work, trying to juggle a job, and possibly have to embrace online learning and assist their children. What is your message to a parent who's very anxious about that tonight?
There's very little that can be done, because first and foremost, for a parent, they've got to get back to work. At the end of the day, if you can't feed your family, it doesn't matter when we go back to school. So, my feeling is that we need to, as parents, we need to be, especially within government schools, be talking to the SGBs. We need to find ways. I mean, there are amazing ways that we can use community. There are gogos and grandparents out there and parents who might not be working. We should be bringing them into our schools to make sure that our children are safe. Use the community out there to bring them into the school, to make sure that our children in school are safe at school. And I think the best way to deal with it when we're looking at our vulnerable areas is to use people that are not at work, like grandparents, bring them into the schools and allow them to help out. I know people will say that, they are the most vulnerable, but if we look after them and we make sure that we have our PPEs in place and we have sanitizing in our schools and we stick to the protocols, we can make sure that our schools are safe. And it is definitely, in our children's best interests to be at school, and we need to be working as communities.
Thank you so much. Executive Head of Redhill School here in Johannesburg.